Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. The intro montage of this episode was this little section right here. And while it may not look like much, this is the foundation and the beginning of the rest of the exhaust for the Mark II. So I've already gone ahead and put the drive shaft in place so that way I can build around it and account for any clearance or any clearances that need to be accounted for. But with the position of this bend and everything else up here, I'm now good to start building backward. And with those two sections of tube there and some leftover bends in the fabrication room over there, I'm pretty well set to start building the rest of this. So I'll need to keep in mind clearances to the body and clearances to the ground. Those are the important parts of any exhaust build. You don't want the exhaust rattling on the bottom of the car, nor do you want it dragging on the ground. You're trying to find that Goldilocks ratio between adequate ground clearance and adequate chassis clearance. And that is where the time-consuming portion with exhaust building comes into play. But I think with the position that this is in right here, I have myself a good starting point, and now let's go ahead and start building backwards. So I have my first section of straight right here, which I put a little bit of a miter grind into, which I'm unsure if you guys will be able to see or not. But this piece of tube will come off of the first little stub that we have for the mid-pipe right here. And then this section right here, which this bend is left over from what I trimmed off of this 90-degree bend to make the first little section of the mid-pipe. And these two together up here, something like that, provided this angle is acceptable or adequate to make the kickover that we need to, this stuff will make up the first portion of the mid-pipe. So you can see that I have the bend taped to another straight section, and I just use some paint tape so that way it doesn't really leave any residue on the pieces of tubing. But I can sit here and kind of move around however I need to get the alignment and the chassis clearance that I want here. And then I can take this section, hold it up, and get a pretty decent idea of where I'm going from here. And it looks like this bend will work for this, but I'm not super concerned about that right this moment. I'm more concerned about this piece that I am holding with my left hand. So with a marker, I'll go ahead and make a couple of index marks on here. I like 3 lines next to each other so that we have 3 points to reference your alignment. And now I can take that piece, I can take this section with the bend off, tack them together. If everything is good, then I can continue moving back, or what I'll more than likely do is weld this seam so it's locked in place, and any movement that the joint is going to do is already accounted for, and then I can continue moving backwards from there. So now that I have my first section tacked up here, and the same as with stainless, I'm an advocate for back purging your tacks. Makes the whole process a little bit better. It makes the welds a little bit more structurally sound. But that aside, I think the more that I look at this pocket that I think more than likely housed the catalytic converter would be a perfect position for my resonator. So I'm not sure if I'll need a section of straight. Yeah, I definitely will. But with this bend there, in a little section of straight, I think we can make that work pretty nicely, and that's a nice home for it right there, because there are no clearance issues in this pocket right here. It has a heat shield and everything else. And then back here where it gets a little bit busier around where the drive shaft and everything else is, I can focus on just fitting tube around there as opposed to this resonator that has a little bit larger body to it. And it has Tycon laser engraved on it, so I'm going to put that facing kind of my direction where I'm at right here, so that a little bit of undercar branding, so that way whoever's under here when the car is on The lift here, they can see Taycan proudly displayed underneath of it, as I love the crew over at Taycan. They've always been good to me. So, what we need to do now, and I think I need some more tape. Let me go grab that. With this last little bit of tape installed, and as you're doing this, you obviously want to get the your piece of a bend or whatever as square on the piece of tubing that it's taping to as possible. I'll double check with this piece of straight tube, and I think I want this to pick up a little bit more. There, something like that seems good. So now I can smooth my tape out. That bend is held roughly in place. And now I can hold my resonator up here and figure out the length of straight tube that I need for this. Now, this resonator, it appears as though a piece of tubing will slide the whole way through it. So we don't really need to factor in a whole lot of receiver off of another piece of tubing, meaning, or sleeving, I guess, meaning how far this piece of tube will sleeve into the resonator. But I'll still have it sleeve a little bit. I guess I can measure to the end of this collar, which is about 1 1/8 inches. So from here, if I hold this up, something like that, and I can measure this distance, which is about 3.5 inches. So I'll take 3.5 inches, add 1 1/8 inches to it, and that will give me the length of the straight section coming off of this little bend that will sleeve into the inside of the resonator, giving me as much engagement as I want with it, and putting the resonator, most importantly, in the correct location along here. While my bandsaw is making the next cut, which I'm sure you guys can hear in the background, I'll go ahead, make a few index marks on this joint, drop this down, tack this together, and then we'll be ready to fit the next section on here whenever the bandsaw is done cutting it. Well, the first section of the midpipe is all tacked together. It's up here on the car, and I want to check ground clearance on this before I weld any of it together. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 seams to do, and I'll knock this out first, so that way as I'm back purging it, I have less area that I need to fill with gas, or less volume I need to fill with gas rather. And I'll be able to get a more effective purge that way as opposed to if I had built the entire midpipe. There's also the portion of it where I don't have to worry about shrinkage or anything moving as I build back from what I have already constructed, as all of that will have already happened if I weld the stuff now and then continue building from there. Now with the car on the ground, as you can see, the lift arms are not contacting the car any longer. If we look through the front here, let's see. There's the oil pan. Let's go around to the back side of the car and be able to see it a little bit better without the oil pan in the way. But here we go. With the car on the ground, you can see the exhaust up there, and you can see a ton of ground clearance. And the car is not at, it isn't necessarily at the ride height that it will be at when it's actually operational, but with the ground clearance that is there currently, and if anything, the front is going to come up a little bit, we're perfectly fine, perfect ground clearance. I'm good to weld that section of the mid-pipe up right now. Now that this section of the mid-pipe is fabricated, or I guess welded, it's all good to go, we now need to knock out the next section, which will be a straight tube and a bend. And I've talked about this before, as I have been building parts like this, or building the exhaust on the Mark IV, is when we went over this before. But as a refresher, we're going to talk about reference points and using reference points under the car to determine where to make your cuts and what have you. So the way that this exhaust needs to go, it needs to come out of the resonator here up to around where this heat shield is, and then make a bend and make its way towards the rear of the car. So without guessing too much, we're going to use reference points to make this happen. So my reference point is going to be this heat shield right here. And what I'm going to do is hold this piece of tubing up roughly in place on the resonator, and then hold this bend right here, and then I have a marker somewhere on my person right here, and using these two reference points, actually looks like this length of straight tubing won't be too awful to make this happen, although it is a little bit long. So if I take this bend, slide it down on the tube a little bit, and kind of eyeball the path that this needs to go, I think if I cut this tube down about this much, that won't be an awful starting point. And if we remember before, on the inlet of this resonator, I sleeved the piece of tubing in 1 1/8 inches. So, with this piece, and this mark, if you guys can see it, right where my index finger is, I can subtract 1 1/8 inches off of this, and that will provide the same overall length that I'm looking for with this piece of tubing, while also factoring in it sleeving into the resonator my desired distance. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me go make this cut, and we'll see if this all works out. The Midpipe is almost fully fabricated, and I have my welder out here, and I'm set up to at least tack on the first hanger. You can see I have one of the Tycon actual rubber or whatever they are hangers right there, and I fabricated the hanger rod itself. And the exhaust will come up a little bit so that contour, the bend of the hanger rod fits a little bit better. But teachable moment, guys, whenever you're putting hanger rods on exhausts or anything like that, always do so on the car. I'm sure you could mark it or tape it or something like that, but in my experience, nothing beats actually doing it on the car. So you can see how things fit in space. There's really no guesswork involved, and things will fit exactly the way that you want them to, provided that you fit up and everything else is good. So with that in mind, I can go ahead and get that hanger rod tacked onto this tube that I can drop this assembly down, although I'll probably figure out one last little bend to kick the outlet of the midpipe kind of up diagonal to make its way into this area where the muffler will reside. Well, another bit of cutting, grinding, welding, all of that in the books. And the Mark II is now the proud owner of a titanium midpipe. So this thing came out better than I imagined that it would. I'm very happy with the overall form that it's taken, how tightly it's tucked to the chassis and to everything else under here. The fact that it has a resonator, and I'm almost at a loss for words, whether that be sleep deprivation or what have you. At the end of the day, I'm very happy with the end result of this Midpipe. So I find it easy to kind of conceptualize and rationalize these projects by dividing them into sub-projects. So the exhaust, we'll take the exhaust for example. We have the downpipe, the midpipe, and the tailpipe sections. And we, right now, are either 2/3 or halfway through the exhaust build for this car. So obviously the downpipe is done, now the midpipe is done, and the last outstanding items for the exhaust build will be the 2 tailpipe sections, which we aren't getting into those in this episode. That will be the next episode. But we are to this point right here, and I have the next V-band flange already fastened down to the one that's on the midpipe, and we're ready to start building backwards, or start building rearwards even more now. But like I said, that will be for an upcoming episode, or probably the next episode, as I'll need to build some hanger brackets and things that I just don't have time to do right now, and I don't want this video to drag on forever. So with that in mind and that being said, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So thank you guys, as always, for tuning in, for coming on all these different adventures with me. And the Mark II has been the focal point for the last little while now. And it can't be understated, or it cannot be overstated rather, how much fun that I'm having with the rebuild on this car. And like you guys, if you've been around for the duration of this build, then you know just how special this car is to me. The fact that it is a relic and a huge sentimental token to my my late dad, and I know he would be really happy and really excited with all the things that are going on with it and going into this build. So I'm very excited because of that, very happy with what been able to accomplish with this so far, and there's still plenty more to go. So a huge thank you to the whole crew at Tycon Industries for making this titanium exhaust and all the titanium work possible. And frankly, when we factor Stainless Bros into the equation as well, for making the header build possible. So if you guys need any high quality stainless or titanium for your projects, I highly advise checking out Stainless Bros for stainless, Tycon for titanium, and they will both be linked in the pinned comment below. If you need any materials for your project, please check them out and see what they can offer you. But with all of that being said, before I ramble on even longer, that'll be the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, and I will see you all in the next episode.